Every major Native American tribe has a story of movement, forced relocations, expanding territories, migrations across entire continents. But there's one group that looked at the rest of the world and said no thanks. They stayed in the same spot for nearly 1,000 years, and they did it on purpose. Today, I'm breaking down every major Native American tribe you need to know about, starting with the people who never left Hopi. The Hopi are the most geographically stubborn people in North American history, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. Their reservation sits on approximately 2.5 million acres in northeastern Arizona, and it is one of the most isolated reservations in the entire country, but the reservation is just the legal boundary. The Hopi have been there since before the paperwork existed. Way before Oraibi, a village on Third Mesa, has been continuously inhabited since approximately 1100 CE, making it one of the oldest continuously lived in settlements in the continental United States. Their oral tradition says they emerged into the fourth world, which is this one, and they simply never saw a reason to leave it. Here's the thing that makes the Hopi genuinely unique on this list. The reservation remained largely resistant to outside infrastructure well into the 20th century. Not because nobody got around to it, because the Hopi deliberately limited outside contact. They chose isolation as cultural preservation, which is a strategy that worked beautifully right up until the New Age movement discovered the Blue Star Katsina prophecy and decided to rewrite it for Instagram. Hopi leadership has publicly stated that much of the popular version is completely fabricated, so naturally, the outside world the Hopi spent centuries avoiding came to them anyway, just with worse intentions and a crystal collection. But if you think choosing to stay put sounds simple, wait until you hear about the tribe that built an empire on horseback across 27.0 square miles. Navajo. Here's something fun. The Navajo reservation completely surrounds the Hopi reservation on all sides, like entirely. The Hopi have been living in the Southwest for over 1,000 years, and then the Navajo showed up around 1400 to 1500 CE from northern Athapascan regions, and just, became the biggest tribe in the entire country. Approximately 400,000 enrolled members, 27,000 square miles of land across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, the largest reservation in the continental United States. Not bad for the new neighbors, but the history isn't all scale and success. In 1864, the US military forced somewhere between 8,000 and 9,000 Navajo on a series of marches covering roughly 300 miles to Bosque Redondo, New Mexico. They called it the Long Walk. Hundreds died along the way, and many more perished during the years of internment that followed, which is, not ideal, but here's where it gets genuinely infuriating. For decades, the US government ran boarding schools where Navajo children were beaten for speaking their own language, punished for it. The goal was to erase it completely. Then World War II happened, and suddenly the military needed a code the Japanese couldn't crack, so they recruited around 400 to 500 Navajo speakers to build an unbreakable cipher using that exact same language, the one they tried to destroy, and it worked. The Navajo code talkers are credited with saving thousands of American lives in the Pacific Theater. Nobody broke the code, ever. That contradiction tells you everything you need to know about the relationship between indigenous nations and the federal government. Today, Navajo arts including rugs, silverwork, and turquoise jewelry represent a significant cultural economy, one of the most recognizable of any tribe in the country. But the Navajo aren't the only ones with a complicated military legacy. The Apache wrote an entirely different kind of war story. Apache. Most people hear Apache and think of one tribe. That's wrong. There were at least 5 distinct Apache groups: the Western Apache, Chiricahua, Mescalero, Jicarilla, and Lipan, each with their own territories, their own governance, and their own ways of making life extremely difficult for anyone who wandered into roughly 90,000 square miles of the American Southwest. That's an area roughly the size of Utah. But let's talk about what everyone actually wants to hear about. Geronimo. His real name was Goyawe, and what he pulled off is genuinely one of the most absurd military feats in recorded history. He had roughly 38 warriors. The United States sent 5,000 soldiers after him. Mexico sent their own troops too. 2 countries, thousands of trained military personnel, and one guy running circles around all of them for years. He didn't surrender until September 4th, 1886 at Skeleton Canyon, Arizona. That's not a war. That's a man refusing to lose on principle. Here's where it gets dark though. After surrender, hundreds of Apache, including scouts who had actually helped the US Army, plus women and children with nothing to do with the fighting, were shipped to Florida, then Fort Sill, Oklahoma. They stayed prisoners for 27 years, from 1886 to 1913. An entire generation born born and raised in captivity before anyone decided maybe that was enough, and the raiding that made the Apache so feared, that escalated as a direct response to Spanish colonists enslaving their people. The Apache didn't wake up one morning and choose violence. Violence chose them, and they just happened to be extraordinarily good at returning it. Today, the White Mountain Apache have around 17,000 members, and the San Carlos Apache around 16,000, each running their own governments. Multiple groups, not one, never was. But if the Apache turned the Southwest into a war zone, the Choctaw turned survival into something nobody saw coming. Choctaw. The Choctaw did everything first and got credit for almost none of it. That's not an exaggeration. That's literally their entire history. Before removal, the Choctaw Nation controlled roughly 23,000 square miles across Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. They had built schools. They had developed a sophisticated agricultural society and governance system. They were among the most politically organized nations in the Southeast. And here's the detail that should genuinely make you angry. The Choctaw had established their own educational institutions and were widely considered one of the most civilized of the 5 civilized tribes. They had built, by every measurable standard, a structured, functioning civilization, so naturally, the United States marched them off their land. The Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek in 1830, following the Indian Removal Act, forced approximately 17,000 Choctaw on a series of brutal journeys into present-day Oklahoma between 1831 and 1833. Somewhere between 2,500 and 6,000 people died from disease, starvation, and exposure along the way. And here's the thing nobody seems to remember. The Choctaw removal was the first Trail of Tears. Before the Cherokee, before the Creek, before anyone. The Choctaw walked it first, but they weren't done being pioneers that history forgot. During World War I, a group of Choctaw soldiers in the 36th Infantry Division were used to transmit military communications in their native language, creating one of the first uses of Native American languages as battlefield code. They did this an entire world war before the Navajo code talkers, who get all the recognition. The Choctaw literally pioneered the concept of code talking, and most people have never heard about it. Today, the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma has roughly 200,000 enrolled members, making them the 3rd largest federally recognized tribe. They survived everything. They just never got the credit. But if you want to talk about a tribe that made sure the entire world knew their name, we need to talk about the Cherokee. Most people know the name Sequoia because of a tree, maybe a national park. What they don't know is that the man behind that name pulled off one of the most remarkable intellectual achievements in recorded history, and he did it with zero formal education. In 1821, Sequoia completed a fully functional syllabary for the Cherokee language. Not an alphabet, a syllabary. 86 characters, each representing a distinct syllable, designed so intuitively that a Cherokee speaker could learn to read and write in a matter of weeks. He had no linguistic training. He couldn't read or write in English. He just sat down and reverse engineered the concept of written language from scratch, like building a car engine after only ever seeing one drive past you on the highway. Here's the thing, it worked. Not in a neat cultural project kind of way. The entire Cherokee Nation achieved near total literacy in under a decade kind of way. For context, that's faster than comparable literacy movements in European history. By 1828, the Cherokee were publishing the Cherokee Phoenix, the first Native American newspaper, in both Cherokee and English. They had a written constitution. They had a functioning government modeled on democratic principles. They were, by every measurable standard, a literate, self-governing nation. And it didn't matter. Between 1836 and 1839, approximately 16,000 Cherokee were forcibly marched roughly 1,000 miles from their ancestral homeland to Indian Territory. The journey took months. Roughly 4,000 people died along the way from disease, starvation, and exposure. A nation that published its own newspaper was walked to death, but not all Cherokee were removed. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, roughly 16,000 enrolled members today, remained in the mountains of North Carolina. They were never marched west, creating a split in Cherokee identity that persists to this day. Meanwhile, the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma grew to over 450,000 enrolled members, making it the largest federally recognized tribe in the country. But if you think a nation with a newspaper had it rough, wait until you hear about the tribe that fought 3 entire wars just to stay in a swamp. Seminole. Every tribe on this list that faced removal eventually either signed a treaty, accepted relocation, or was militarily defeated. The Seminole said no to all three. The Seminole Nation wasn't some ancient civilization. They emerged in the 1700s as a coalescence of Creek, Miccosukee, and other southeastern peoples who migrated into Spanish Florida. They were, in a sense, a nation built from the people other nations lost. And from the moment the United States decided it wanted Florida, the Seminole became a problem that refused to go away. 3 wars, over 40 years of conflict. The first Seminole War kicked off in 1817, and the fighting didn't truly end until 1858. The Second Seminole War alone cost the US government somewhere between $30 and $40 million, which in today's money lands somewhere around $600 million to $1 billion. It also killed approximately 1,500 American soldiers. The United States spent the modern equivalent of $1 billion trying to drag people out of a swamp, and it didn't work. About 3,000 to 4,000 Seminole were eventually removed to Oklahoma. But here's the thing, roughly 300 to 500 of them simply retreated deeper into the Florida Everglades and stayed there. No surrender, no treaty, no formal capitulation. The US military eventually just gave up and went home, which is, you know, not ideal if you're the world's emerging superpower. That makes the Seminole the only major eastern tribe to never formally surrender to the United States and maintain continuous presence in their homeland through active resistance. Everyone else on this side of the Mississippi was moved. They weren't. There's a modern layer to this too. The Seminole historically absorbed escaped enslaved people into their society, known as Black Seminoles, and their descendants are now at the center of ongoing membership and identity debates connected to the tribe. It's genuinely complicated and there's no clean answer, but if you think the Seminoles' refusal to move was impressive, wait until you hear about a tribe that controlled 0 square miles of open plains and made the entire US military rethink mounted warfare. Shoshone. Most people know exactly one thing about the Shoshone, and they don't even know it correctly. Sacagawea wasn't a guide. That's the myth that got cemented into every elementary school textbook in America. She was a translator and cultural liaison, and she did the entire Lewis and Clark expedition, all of it, while carrying her infant son, Jean Baptiste, on her back. The baby was there for the whole journey, across mountains, rivers, hostile territory, a teenager with a newborn, keeping an entire expedition from getting killed through diplomacy. But Sacagawea is the footnote. The real Shoshone story is significantly darker. The Shoshone controlled roughly 60,000 square miles of some of the harshest terrain in North America. We're talking the Great Basin, the Rockies, stretching across Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, and into California. They split into 3 distinct groups: the Western Shoshone, Eastern Shoshone, and Northern Shoshone, each with their own territories and their own governance. The Eastern Shoshone signed the Fort Bridger Treaty in 1868, which established the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming at approximately 2.2 million acres. But here's where it gets genuinely insane. The Western Shoshone never signed a treaty ceding their land. Not one. No treaty of removal, no land sale. Nothing was ever ratified. Their territorial claim is one of the longest unresolved disputes in American Indian law. The land, legally and historically, was never given up. So what did the United States do with this unceded, legally contested Shoshone territory? They detonated over 900 nuclear weapons on it. From 1951 to 1992, the Nevada test site hosted nuclear test after nuclear test on land. The Western Shoshone never agreed to surrender. 900 explosions on someone else's property, which is, you know, not ideal. That's not a metaphor for colonialism. That's just colonialism with a mushroom cloud. And if you think that's the most absurd military story involving a Native American nation, wait until you hear about the Nez Perce retreat. Nez Perce. The Nez Perce once controlled around 13 million acres across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Today, their reservation sits at roughly 750,000 acres. That's a reduction of over 94%, which is, you know, not ideal. The Nimiipuu, as they call themselves, practiced consensus-based governance, where decisions came from councils, not kings. This completely confused the US government, who kept trying to find the guy in charge so they could get a signature on a treaty. The Nez Perce didn't have the guy in charge. They had dozens of band leaders who all had to agree, so naturally, the US just picked whoever was willing to sign and called it official. title, but here's where it gets legendary. In 1877, after being told to leave their ancestral lands or face military action, roughly 800 Nez Perce decided to flee toward Canada. Only about 250 were warriors. The rest were women, children, and elders. They were pursued by over 2,000 US soldiers across roughly 1,170 miles of brutal mountain terrain. The retreat lasted about 5 months. They fought multiple engagements along the way and won most of them. A refugee column carrying grandmothers and infants outmaneuvered professional soldiers across 4 states for months. Military historians consider it one of the greatest fighting retreats in recorded history. Great. Add that to the list of things we don't teach in school. Chief Joseph gets most of the credit, but leaders like Looking Glass and Whitebird were equally critical. Whitebird actually made it to Canada with around 150 survivors. Joseph's fame is largely a product of which leader the US media decided to write about. And before all of this, the Nez Perce were already remarkable for developing the Appaloosa horse breed through sophisticated selective breeding, building trade networks stretching from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Plains. They were actively shaping the genetics of an entire species to build an economy. Today, the Nez Perce tribe has approximately 3,600 enrolled members, from 13 million acres to 750,000. From one of history's greatest military retreats to a population that could fit in a mid-sized concert venue. But if you think the Nez Perce had it rough on the plains, wait until you hear about the nation that literally dominated them. Around 1700, a small band of Shoshone people broke away from their relatives and drifted south onto the Great Plains. Nobody noticed, nobody cared. Within 150 years, they controlled over 250,000 square miles of territory across Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Kansas, and Colorado, and every major power on the continent knew their name, Comanche. The Comanche didn't just adopt the horse, they became the horse. While other tribes incorporated horses into existing lifestyles, the Comanche rebuilt their entire civilization around mounted warfare and mobility. Children learned to ride before they could walk properly. Warriors could hang off the side of a galloping horse at full speed, using the animal's body as a shield while firing arrows underneath its neck. They maintained enormous herds, sometimes numbering in the tens of thousands, and developed breeding practices that produced faster, more resilient mounts than anything the US cavalry could field. Here's the thing, the horse was their nuclear weapon. One technological advantage, mastered to absolute perfection, turned a minor splinter group into the undisputed rulers of the Southern Great Plains. They earned the title Lords of the Southern Plains, and nobody gave it to them out of politeness. The US Army had to completely rethink its frontier strategy because standard military tactics simply did not work against Comanche cavalry. Soldiers trained in European-style formation combat kept getting outmaneuvered by warriors who'd been riding since childhood, which is, you know, not ideal if you're trying to project military dominance across a continent. The Comanche resisted American expansion through the 1870s, one of the last major nations to do so on the plains, and their legacy didn't end there. During World War II, approximately 17 Comanche code talkers used their language to create unbreakable military communications for the US military in the European theater. The same people the government had spent decades trying to conquer were now helping win a global war. Today, the Comanche Nation has roughly 17,000 enrolled members headquartered in Lawton, Oklahoma. But if you think the Comanche rose fast, wait until you hear about the nation that reshaped the entire political structure of North America before Europeans even showed up. Sioux. When people picture Native American history, they're picturing the Sioux, the vast plains, the mounted warriors, the last stand against an empire. And honestly, that image isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. The Sioux Nation isn't one tribe, it's 3 distinct groups: the Dakota in the east, the Nakota in the middle, and the Lakota in the west. Together they controlled over 200,000 square miles across at least 9 present-day states. Pre-contact population estimates range from 40,000 to over 100,000 people. Today, enrolled Sioux populations exceed 170,000 across multiple tribal entities. The Oglala Sioux tribe alone has roughly 47,000 members at Pine Ridge, one of the largest reservation populations in the country. But here's where it gets complicated. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 established the Great Sioux Reservation at approximately 60 million acres. Massive, protected, legally binding. Then gold was discovered in the Black Hills in 1874, and the United States basically said, yeah, about that treaty, we changed our minds. 6 years. That's how long the ink lasted. What followed was the single most famous military victory by any indigenous force in American history. The Battle of the Little Bighorn, June 25th to 26th, 1876. Roughly 1,000 1,500 to 2,000 Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors under Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse absolutely destroyed Custer's 7th Cavalry. 268 US soldiers killed, a complete and total humiliation, and it was the worst thing that could have happened to the Sioux. Winning that battle gave Washington exactly what it needed: public outrage, political justification, and an excuse to escalate everything. Instead of deterring expansion, Little Bighorn accelerated it. The military campaigns that followed over the next decade were relentless. The punctuation mark came on December 29th, 1890. Wounded Knee, somewhere between 250 and 300 Lakota killed by US forces, primarily women, children, and elders. That wasn't a battle, that was a massacre. And it's widely recognized as the end of the Indian Wars era, not with a final stand, but with a mass grave. But if you think the story of broken treaties ends with the Sioux, wait until you hear how an entire confederacy helped shape the foundation of American democracy and got erased from the credit Haudenosaunee. While Europe was busy with kings and queens and divine right and all the usual nonsense, 6 nations in present-day New York were running a democratic confederacy where women could remove leaders from power, and they'd been doing it for centuries. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which you might know by the European name Iroquois, originally comprised 5 nations: the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. The Tuscarora were admitted around 1722, making it 6. Together they controlled roughly 6 million acres across New York, Pennsylvania, and surrounding regions. Some scholars date the founding of this confederacy to 1142 CE. That's almost 650 years before the US Constitution was written, which is relevant because the Haudenosaunee might have helped inspire it. Here's the thing: their governing document, the Great Law of Peace, called the Gaya-Nasha-Gowa, established a matrilineal, consensus-based democratic system. Clan mothers nominated and could remove chiefs. Decisions required agreement across nations, not a single ruler's decree. This wasn't some loose tribal council. This was a functioning multi-nation government with checks, balances, and distributed power. While Henry VIII was busy decapitating wives, the Haudenosaunee were practicing representative democracy with women in positions of genuine structural authority. Some historians argue this framework directly influenced the founding fathers when they designed the US government. The degree of that influence is debated, but the timeline and the contact are not. Benjamin Franklin explicitly referenced the Confederacy's unity as a model during the Albany Congress of 1754. Congress itself passed a resolution in 1988 acknowledging the contribution, so at minimum, the oldest participatory democracy in North America was not the one we usually celebrate. And they weren't just political theorists, they were power brokers. The Covenant Chain Alliance system made the Haudenosaunee a geopolitical force that both the British and French had to negotiate with as equals. Not as subjects, not as curiosities, as equals. European colonial strategy in North America was literally shaped by whether the Haudenosaunee were on your side or not. Today, the Confederacy maintains 6 federally recognized nations with enrolled populations exceeding 125,000. The Onondaga Nation still serves as the central firekeepers of the Confederacy. But ongoing tensions with both the US and Canadian governments over sovereignty and border crossing rights persist, because apparently a 900-year-old government still isn't old enough to be taken seriously. But if you think a confederacy that predates the Constitution is impressive, wait until you meet the people who built a civilization in one of the most hostile environments on the planet, Inuit. Last section we talked about a confederacy that helped shape American democracy. Now we're ending with a people who made the entire concept of territory look like a joke. The Hopi occupied 1.5 million acres. The Navajo Nation covers 27,000 square miles. The Inuit, 4 to 5 million square miles across the Arctic and subarctic. That's not a territory, that's a continent. The largest geographic range of any indigenous group on this entire list, and it's not even close. Every other tribe we've covered today could fit inside Inuit lands and still have room left over. And they didn't just survive there, they thrived. For over 5,000 years, the Inuit and their ancestors maintained sophisticated survival systems across one of the most hostile environments on Earth, using almost nothing but organic materials. No imported technology, just an intimate, generational understanding of ice, wind, water, and animal behavior that no outside civilization has ever replicated. That's humanity's single most successful adaptation to polar regions. Full stop. Today, over 180,000 Inuit live across circumpolar regions, with roughly 33,000 to 40,000 Inupiat and Yupik people in Alaska alone. And before anyone uses the other word, it's complicated. Eskimo is widely considered offensive in Canada and Greenland, though some Alaska Native groups, particularly Yupik peoples, actually use it themselves since Inuit doesn't describe them. Context matters. In 1971, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act handed approximately 44 million acres to Alaska Native corporations, the largest land settlement in US history at the time. The catch? It extinguished all Alaska Native claims to ancestral lands, so you know, generous and devastating in the same signature. Here's the thing that makes the Inuit story different from every other tribe on this list. A significant majority of contemporary Inuit households still harvest country food, wild game, wild fish. Subsistence isn't a chapter in their history book, it's Tuesday, but the environment that protected and defined these people for millennia is now disappearing. Sea ice is vanishing, permafrost is thawing, climate change is doing what colonization, isolation, and thousands of years of brutal Arctic winters never could. It's making the land itself unlivable. Millennia of adaptation may become unviable within a single generation, and unlike every other threat on this list, you can't negotiate with a melting planet. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.